So today we will introduce first what the sort of speakers and the presentations that we have. All of these presentations have come through case studies that have been developed, and they've been inspired by the Research Libraries UK position paper that's just come out of the Special Collections and Heritage Network. I'm hoping somebody will just put that in the chat because it's really worth a read. So if you haven't had a look at that, please do have a look at that position paper, and that's inspired these case studies. So just to introduce everybody that you'll be hearing from today, we have Dr. Rebecca Wade, who's Associate Curator of Cultural Collections at the University of Leeds. And that's a case study which is looking at what happens when you place an artist in residence with lived experience in and amongst the collections, working with them. Then we'll hear from Dr. Jonathan Bush, Research Engagement and Collections Development Archivist at Durham University, and Jia Zhu, PhD candidate in Visual Culture at Durham University. And they're going to be looking at untold stories from archives, particularly in the context of LGBTQ+ networks and storytelling. And then finally, we're going to hear from Ailey O'Hagan, Digital Preservation Librarian, who is one of the TNA RLUK Fellowship recipients. And as a result of her work, she's going to be talking through a sort of equity and inclusion approach to digital preservation and curation. So 3 different and absolutely fascinating topics coming up.
Thank you so much to the organisers for the invitation to speak today. I'm really excited to hear everyone else's case studies and to have a really lively discussion at the end of this session. Just so you know what to expect, I'll be speaking for around 10 minutes and then I'll be showing a video for around 10 minutes too. So Cultural Collections and Galleries here at the University of Leeds is an interdisciplinary hub for research, teaching and public engagement, encompassing diverse and internationally significant archives, rare books, manuscripts, art and material culture. These collections support both academic inquiry and creative practice. Housed in purpose-designed gallery and studio spaces, including the Stanley and Audrey Burton Gallery and the Treasures of the Brotherton Gallery, the service plays a vital role in advancing scholarly dialogue, fostering cross-disciplinary collaboration, and enriching the cultural life of the campus and wider community. For 6 months in 2024, Sarah Roberts was an artist in residence, embedded in our research centre and supported by our colleagues to access material relevant to her research interests. Roberts has a long-standing engagement with caring practices anchored in her lived experience. During her residency, she encountered a diverse range of books, photographs, plans, medical instruments, and art objects related to environments of care. The different contexts of care represented by these materials span global conflict, domestic and family life, the history and philosophy of science, public health initiatives, and the development of medical tourism. While our own cultural collections formed the core of her research and creative practice, we also supported her to access related collections, both within and beyond the University of Leeds. Within the university, we connected her with the Museum of the History of Science, Technology and Medicine, part of the Centre for History and Philosophy of Science. And outside the university, she also worked with the collections of the Thackeray Medical Museum, which is just 2 miles away from the university. These conversations with our collections informed the production of Sick, a note from 40 Sandyland Road and Other Stories, a new body of work commissioned by the University of Leeds and presented in the Stanley and Audrey Burton Gallery. In our sister space, the Treasures of the Brotherton Gallery, Roberts co-curated Sick 2, a display that uncovers the creative process behind Sick in her own words. So in this short paper, I'll articulate some of the ways in which our collections were synthesised through this research-led creative practice, alongside related shifts in our curatorial practice and public programme. Roberts became interested in books related to medical tourism and health spas and accessed works between the 1820s and 1970s. Based on her childhood experiences of growing up in a Welsh coastal resort, she wrote, I quote, "I love the idea of the seaside as a rest cure. The wealth of older people flocking to my small tourist-trapped village as a kid. The spa has become so embedded in normal life, hen do's and birthdays, and further away from healing the infirm." End of quote. Spa towns emerged in Britain in the 18th century based on the popularity of mineral-rich waters believed to cure ailments. By the 19th century, rest cures focused on a period of enforced rest, isolation, and quiet to treat conditions such as nervous disorders. These treatments, which combine nature's healing qualities with medical expertise, shaped British wellness culture and medical tourism. Scarborough became known for its mineral-rich springs and therapeutic sea baths. The town's picturesque coastline, combined with growing Victorian interest in seaside health retreats, solidified its status as a spa destination. In her creative response to this material, Roberts focused on the chemical composition of Scarborough's spa water, presented in John Kelk's book, The Scarborough Spa, Its New Chemical Analysis and Medicinal Uses, to which is added On the Utility of the Bath, published in London in 1843. You see an image of that on your screen on the left. She worked with chemists here at the university to recreate the formula contained in her installation in soda stream bottles that recall the artist's childhood in the 1990s. They're placed in a section of the installation centered on a water cooler, modified with abstracted blown glass elements and other found objects. For Roberts, the water cooler represents the moment of respite in a hospital setting, where the carer is invited to attend to their own basic needs and perhaps enter into conversation with strangers. It quickly became clear that in addition to the new installation commissioned for the Stanley and Audrey Burton Gallery, there was an opportunity to enrich our audience's experience of the work by co-programming a display of Roberts' research materials in our sister venue on campus, the Treasures of the Brotherton Gallery. The artist and I co-curated this selection, which included 3 of our own interventions in the form of ceramic objects that had migrated from the installation. So here in the right, you can see one of these objects titled Asclepius and Ladders. In Roberts' words, the snakes reference the rod of Asclepius, wielded by the Greek god associated with healing and medicine. They can also be read through the game of snakes and ladders and the role of chance in chronic illness and who it affects. When toys reference this, it seems illogical to feel shame for that which we cannot control, and yet we do. End of quote. Roberts also developed her interest in the history of convalescent nutrition, which is well represented in our cookery collection, one of 5 designated collections that we hold. Cookbooks for the sick reflected evolving medical and nutritional knowledge. These books, often written by nurses, doctors, or home economists, provided recipes for easily digestible, restorative meals. They recommended bland, soft foods believed to aid recovery. Our scientific understanding of vitamins and calories grew, so did the sophistication of these guides. By the mid-20th century, cookbooks incorporated dietary recommendations for specific illnesses, bridging home cooking and medical care. These texts highlight changing perceptions of food as both comfort and cure in times of illness. On the significance of these works to her own lived experience, Roberts wrote, "My sister had diabetes, and I found myself in the thick of her diet. She would eat sugars that would result in us visiting Aberystwyth Hospital most weekends. These self-assured prescriptive books are a reminder of the rhythms of care. They present foods to attract the palate and distract from the loss of something like normalcy." End of quote. In the display case on the left, you'll see another of her ceramic interventions in the form of a pink pudding resting in a decorative glass dish. For Roberts, these objects reference the often frustrated attempts to provide attractive and nutritious food to those for whom she had caring responsibilities as a young person. She commented, My sister and my dad were both given Complan meal replacement drinks. Despite all efforts to make palatable, pretty food, we were failing the battle against illness. The shakes were a homogeneous pink with little taste and less variation. The ceramics hint at these discarded attempts at nourishment. They are daft and seductive with their blancmange colouring. It's easy to look back on for their aesthetic, but harder underneath. End of quote. In her installation, a detail of which you can see on the right, this material entered the section she called the sick room, in which you can see powder-coated potato ricer, a jelly mould in the shape of a fish, a toast rack, and in the background, dishes filled with pink swirls that could equally be ice cream or fecal matter, both pretty and quietly repulsive. The sick room also contained references to the apparatus of care, both domestic and institutional. Roberts was interested in the furniture that entered the home and made the familiar strange. Through our collections, she explored the history of care and particularly related to the book Notes from Sick Rooms, written by Julia Stephen, Virginia Woolf's mother. She described it in the following terms. The compact manual focused on an empathic care and a recognition of the simple human needs of the sick that remain unchanged. It maintains the idea of the sick as humans experiencing illness, rather than a people unto themselves. End of quote. In the early 20th century, furniture for the sick was designed with hygiene, comfort, and functionality in mind. Hospital beds featured adjustable metal frames for patient positioning, while reclining chairs and wheel tables aided convalescence. Materials like steel and enamel started to replace wood to prevent the spread of disease. Domestic sickroom furniture included lightweight, movable pieces for caregivers' ease. These innovations reflected a growing medical understanding of disease and the shift towards patient-centred care in both hospitals and homes. On her response to these historical sources, she reflected, "These velvet-lined wooden cabinets, pewter vessels, glass receptacles, and wheeled chairs were all designed out of functionality at the time, but they also make illness more of a human thing. I find modern hospitals fascinating, the way they attempt to make their screens softer, homely, with additions of fake floral or primary polka dot prints. In the same way, when a respirator or an IV drip enters a living room, it becomes somehow alien, clashing with the three-piece suite." End of quote. In addition to exhibiting Roberts' installation and research materials, curator Laura Claveria, exhibitions assistant Laura Smith, and archivist Holly Smith developed a range of events and resources designed to support both colleagues and audiences in engaging with the sensitive themes explored in the work. In February of this year, Freya Douglas McTurk, a staff counsellor at the University of Leeds, delivered training on compassionate conversations with visitors and self-care for staff. This session deepened our understanding of how emotionally powerful experiences generated by exhibitions, while often challenging, are not necessarily negative. We learned to foster a safe and supportive environment for those emotional encounters, for both the audiences and our team, and ensured the availability of information on relevant support organisations in the gallery space. This approach built on trauma-informed practices previously developed for the cataloguing and display of the Women's Aid Federation of England archive by my colleague Holly Smith, who I think is on this call, and was thoughtfully adapted to meet the specific needs of this project. The associated engagement and events programme was firmly grounded in the principles of equity, diversity and inclusion. As part of this, the artist and I participated in a workshop titled Therapeutic Interventions, Emotions, Ethics in the Archive, organised by our Developing Healthy Engagement Network. During the session, the artist shared her methodologies for working with archival materials related to chronic and palliative care, bereavement, disability and discrimination, offering insight into her ethical and emotional approach to this difficult content. Our public programme also reflects these thematic concerns. The artist invited choreographer Christopher Matthews to respond to the installation through a performance piece titled Forest of the Dance Floor, which explored the interplay between the HIV/AIDS crisis and the vibrant, defiant joy of queer club culture in the 1980s and 90s. Matthew also contributed a durational audio intervention called Lay Still Here, which invites visitors to lie on the gallery floor and engage with a carefully curated playlist assembled as an act of memory. Sarah Roberts' residency demonstrated the profound potential of creative practice to animate cultural collections and make visible the lived experience of illness and care. Through material exploration, personal narrative, and collaborative scholarship, Sick and Sick 2 reframe medical history not just as scientific advancement, but as a deeply human, emotional terrain. As curators and custodians, our engagement with Roberts' practice encouraged us to reimagine how collections can be animated to speak to contemporary issues, inviting audiences not just to observe, but to feel, remember, and question the infrastructures of care that shape our lives. So to conclude my section, I'd like to now show you a short video that was put together by my colleague, Laura Cavarria, who's a curator of the Stanley and Audrey Burton Gallery, in conversation with Sarah Roberts, because I think it will give you a much more holistic sense of the exhibition and the materials with which she was working.
We are absolutely delighted to be able to present this new commission by the incredibly talented artist Sarah Roberts. Sarah has created a multifaceted and immersive installation exploring environments of care. This new body of work investigates how domestic and hospital settings tend to blur when providing care for a seriously ill person.
I'm Sarah Roberts and I am a Welsh artist who is based here in Leeds. This exhibition is called Sick, a Note from 40 Sandilands Road and Other Stories. 40 Sandilands Road is the house in which I grew up when I was a child. I was a young carer, which I didn't actually realise at the time. So I have a familial experience of hoarding and collecting. There's a joy in materiality that comes alongside that, and with it also this kind of hangover of shame that you can have along that consumptive behaviour. I'm interested in the materiality of space and the way we do construct these environments around ourselves to almost like manage our experience as a human body and create a still space for looking. And that's what I'm interested in recreating for the viewer, to almost distill the sense of a place that I found materially seductive and turn that into a new representation, a new environment that they can experience themselves.
Sarah has worked across a wide range of media, including ceramics, industrial materials, found objects, medical paraphernalia, collage, sound, scent, and for the first time, woven textiles and blown glass. As part of the project, we invited Sarah to do a 6-month residency at the University of Leeds last year. She studied and got inspiration from a wide range of materials around healthcare from our cultural collections. These included items relating to hospitals, medical objects, cookery recipes for convalescents, folk remedies, hygiene, human anatomy, illness and restorative practices.
The archive team helped me to find this anatomy of bones from the 1700s. It's just the most amazing volume that contains all these very intricate drawings of bones and skeletal scaffolds. The bodies are out of scale, out of sync with the landscapes that exist behind them and the contextual objects that they seem to be holding. They seem to reference the distance of that protagonist from the landscape behind them, sort of embodiment of the sick, of the reason that we need to unpick how this body exists and how it works and how it malperforms. We found within one of the books a recipe for creating a gallon of spa water, so to recreate that essential moment of the spa. We contacted the chemistry department at Leeds University, who have helped us to recreate that spa water, which now exists within the exhibition, and it's bottled in SodaStream bottles, which is a pertinent reference to my youth. Cultural collections here have amazing cookery books. They contain a lot of prescriptive ideas on healthcare, the sick room, how to look after invalids and how to feed them. I was interested in a lot of the photographs I found in the military hospital selections, these moments where it appears that people have created rooms for themselves within these environments of care, that they bring elements of their own past or present or something in there that is like a photograph or some flowers or, you know, things that permeate in some way. I was very keen to include this work in the selection that's shown at Treasures Gallery. It's a work by Georgie Gordon, who is an amazing painter. And I felt like it really captured a moment of that solitary nature that you can have around sickness and care. This is what I think like a sketchbook looks like, and then you see other people's really beautiful ones and like that. Mine have things that say 5 dolphins equals 1 metre and that you need 38 metres. When I'm making a work, I normally start off with a colour palette, and in this installation it fixes mainly on like 2 colours as its base point. But here's the beginnings of looking at this idea of creating a fountain from where I was looking at the Scarborough Spa stuff. And you can see how it morphs from like almost something that is a real fountain into this water cooler. And this is like a pastel sketch of the teenage bedroom, this idea of it being flattened into almost a colour, like an idea of something, an idea of this like space of retreat. So this area is the sick room. So it's a contained space within the wider space. In the archives, I found a lot of prescriptive methodologies on how you would construct a sick room within the house, where the attendance room would lie in response to it. The colour is extracted from palettes from a book that I found in the Thackeray collection. I like this idea of this hospital green spreading over the architectural elements of the space, that it almost emulates the spread of the sick and the spread of the care that comes alongside it and the changing that happens to objects within the home. So the sink and the bed that you see behind you and the chair, they all have exaggerated proportions. It takes me back to this notion of being a child, like not quite understanding what's happening, not quite having this parallel relationship with people, like an out of step kind of feel. These panels are actually more exposing than covering up. They contain an illustration of pneumonia, which was done by Ethel Wright in 1909. And this illustration I found in the university's Museum of History of Science, Technology and Medicine. This whole space is like semi-voyeuristic, which is how I feel a house can become if you do enter that moment where somebody is having palliative care or chronic care. This area is the hoard space. These are the things that I imagine are pushed out of the house. There are objects, toys that are unplayed with, like bound objects that sort of have lost their usefulness. This space is the teenage bedroom, or rather the attendance room, as it would be described in the prescriptive guides in the archive. So this would be a safe space for myself as the young carer. And these ceramic snakes refer to the rod of Asclepius, which references in Greek mythology the deity for healing, but also references the game of chance that is snakes and ladders. It's like Susan Sontag says that everybody has a passport to the kingdom of the sick. But music is a key aspect. This was like an emotional salve for me as a young person. We've created a soundtrack which is a compilation of 36 songs. It would have been things like a go-to to listen to on repeat. 36 songs because that would emulate a Now compilation from the 90s. These are mixed in with different sounds that are soothing, like the sounds of cats and seagulls, the roar of a lion. This is the sanctuary space, which refers largely to the books that I found in the archive on Scarborough Spa and like healing, restorative powers of seawater, sea bathing. I thought a lot about my upbringing on the coast and how, as a young carer, my moments of escape would have come from going to the seaside, going out with my friends, going to the arcades and the Buccaneer. And this is almost like a hybrid space in itself. It's a water cooler moment in hospitals for those caring and those being cared for. The dolphin frieze is a frieze of ceramic dolphins in a lilac colour that runs all around the space, almost like a dado rail that you would get architecturally, but it emulates me drawing dolphins on the wall of my bedroom when I was a child. The wayfinders are like the wayfinders that you get in hospital. They're something that you can kind of cling to, and they also are covered in these fluorescent stars that I used to stick all over my ceiling as a child. I guess another tool of navigation through something that could be potentially difficult. The collages are hung in a way that one might hang pictures in a hallway. And in a sense, these are also another hybrid space because they become something between a salon hang being in this gallery format and this more unorthodox way of hanging pictures that one might do of loved ones at home.
Sarah has created an incredibly personal and generous body of work that, whilst dealing with challenging issues, aims to be joyous, hopeful and cathartic.
I just want to start by talking a little bit about the background to this project and my role really in contributing towards the sort of broader EDI strategy of Durham University. So from 2022 to 2024, I worked as the University Archivist at Palace Green Library at Durham University in Special Collections, looking after the university's own historic records. Now, the University Archive is pretty well catalogued. My predecessor was very good at that, and often to item level. So it was in a sense possible to answer most queries through carrying out a simple search on the catalogue. So doing a simple search through our catalogue and then getting results. Example of Hatfield, which is one of our colleges. Type in Hatfield, you get a lot of hits on the side there, and you would just click on a link, and that will take you into the catalogue. And the researcher would just note down the reference number, and then they would be able to call it up. So it was really quite a simple process, and really extremely useful. And not just university records, but also a lot of our catalogues are a lot of our collections are very well catalogued. Sorry, I'm just again. So what I think is, what certainly I found more difficult though was to find out more about the history of Durham's marginalised communities, whether that's students and staff with disabilities, people of colour, working class students, or LGBTQ plus communities in Durham. But when I first started in this role, I was fortunately able to a certain extent address the balance. So my role was partly funded by the EDI department, mainly to research into the university's history and its historic links with slavery and colonialism, and therefore to kind of readdress the historical records somewhat. And this was part of the work around the university's Race Equality Bronze Charter Award, which they awarded in summer 2022. And I was also lucky enough to be awarded a grant through the university's EDI funds to recruit 2 interns to carry out more granular research for this project, which I found enormously helpful because the interns uncovered findings that would really not have been possible without their help. So following completion of this project, and I hope that the report will be published this year, I wanted to kind of turn my attention towards other marginalised groups, and particularly the LGBTQ plus community. So I tried to reach out to the LGBTQ plus student network with little success, but I did manage to make contact with Dr. Joan Lubin of the university's English department. And Joan did some initial scoping based on some recommendations that I suggested, but had very little success in finding anything substantial through searching the catalogue. other than this rather interesting poster from the College of Phil. But I suppose to a certain extent, the absence of LGBTQ plus related activities in the record is perhaps understandable, given that essentially homosexuality was illegal until 1967, and even then it was only became legal between two consenting adults of the age of 21. So it was not until 1994 that the age was actually lowered to 18. And so given that most students and students were aged between 18 and 21, I suppose in some ways it's perhaps not surprising that the student community may not have felt comfortable in making themselves visible in this sense. Having said that, there were, I suppose, to a certain extent, a testament to the community that other universities, such as UCL being an example, have found evidence of a very vibrant LGBTQ plus culture in the 1970s and 1980s. So I thought there must be something in this. There must be further, more detailed research that needed to be done on this. And having spoken to Joan, she undertook a project using students to research into the history of Cornell University in the US, which subsequently turned into a digital exhibition. And this seemed to me to be a good way forward, particularly after the positive experience I had with using research interns for the Slavery and Colonialism project. So a subsequent further successful EDI fund application followed, and as a result, we were able to recruit Gia Chu to the project. And so I'm now going to hand over to Gia to tell you about her experiences in doing this project, her research methodology, and her findings. And I'm going to be the slide master. So Gia, if you want to just let me know when you want to move on.
Yeah, sure. Yes, thank you. So for me, it's a very rewarding experience for me because I think we did find a lot of unexpected history from this research. And first of all, I would like to talk a little bit about the research methodology. Can we go to the next slide? So we were looking at, can we go to the next one? Thank you. So basically, we were looking at a very wide range of materials from the archive that are housed in Palace Green Library. So also they are the materials from different areas. So we were mainly looking at, for example, the internal documents such as disciplinary records and meeting minutes from the Durham Student Union, so that it can give us a sense of how DSU was organizing this event and what kind of support they were giving to the Durham's LGBT plus society. And also we were looking at the materials such as photos and flyers from the LGBT society, which also offer a lot of insights, and also student newspaper Palatinate and annual DSU handbook also become a very important sources for our research because we found a lot of debates around topics around the LGBTQ plus, and we also found how the society have been introduced to students and how accessible they have been in the history. And the next one, please. And finally, we also, apart from the university, the archive from the university, we were also looking at something beyond the campus, but associated with our university. For example, the local and national newspaper, where we found some reports on the LGBTQ issues related to Durham University. We were also looking at the flyers from local theatre that have organized performance of LGBTQ plus plays that was originally performed and designed by crew from the university. The next one, please. And I want to share a few headline findings for the research. It's just only a slide from the whole entire finding, but I think they are the most representative, I think. So first, Durham, the current LGBTQ plus student society at Durham University might be one of the oldest LGBTQ plus student society in the UK. So in the archive, its origin can be traced back to 1972, when they first appeared in Durham Student Union Handbook. And at that time, it was called the Northeast Gay Liberation Front. And I think based on the name and the time it was found, I think it might be a branch of the national movement of the Gay Liberal Front, which emerged in the UK throughout the entire country in the early 70s. And based on the internal documents, the establishment of this society has a lot to do with a very important motion in 1972 is from the National Union of Students, and it encouraged student union in the UK to support university LGBTQ plus group. And since 1972, DSU has been offering funding and also a lot of support to the Durham's LGBTQ society. And the society had changed a lot of name from Northeast AKA Liberation Front to East and LGBTQ Society as it is now. The next one, please. Yeah. But I mean, even though we have the support from DSU, we still face a lot of challenges. And one of the major difficulties that the society faced was the student apathy. So the number of members we can find in the archive are all relatively very low. And this is probably because of the stigma surrounding LGBTQ plus identity at that time. Because we found a lot of articles written by students that actually discuss this issue about why students were so reluctant to join the community, even though they might be interested in it. And we also found an article saying that in the Fresh Affair, the LGBTQ plus society, their store will usually be put in the corner very distant from the majority of other society. And also students were just so reluctant to come forward because they were afraid to be recognized or something. So all of this, I think, kind of result in a student apathy that has been a major challenge for the society during 70s, 80s, and 90s. And also the funding from DSU has also remained very limited. But apart from all this difficulty, the society resisted and successfully hosted a lot of regular events for the students to help them to build a sense of community. This includes confidential on-campus meeting on a weekly basis. And also in the 80s, we have guest talks held in the Elvid Riverside building. And usually the guest talk involve university lecturers. And also sometimes we have the guest speakers from outside the campus. And one major event, LGBTQ plus Awareness Week, which is still being run until today. And its first appearance in the campus was 1990 with the support of DSU, but the record showed that the financial support was very limited. It was only like £30 in 1990. But the LGBTQ Awareness Week managed to continue and until today, and strive until today. And the next one, please. And the second one would be how students fight for equality, was fighting for equality not only within the campus, but they were also trying to build a connection with the nation and also engage with national topic. And one major event would be the Gay Conference at Harfield College in January 1981. So it was a 4-day festival organized by the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, and it attracted over 1,000 attendants from gay society across the country. But for holding that event, the Harfield College faced significant controversy, and the college received letters from all over the area, like not only for the religions organizations, but also from local residents to question about this event and also oppose this event, because at that time Hartfield College was still an all-men college, and a lot of local residents believe that holding this gay conference will actually affect the reputation of Hartfield College being a very historical all-men college. But the college principal really faced the controversy, it faced the stress, and responded to all the letters and insisted on hosting the event. And according to the Palatinus report, the event was very successful. Yeah, the next one, please. And another thing we can find, which is also very interesting, is how students actually engage with national topic surrounding LGBTQ plus issues. So a few topic here is, for example, Clause 28 implemented by Margaret Thatcher's government that banned local authorities from promoting homosexuality. And also in 1994, when the age of consent for male homosexual sex was lowered from 21 to 18, which was a great improvement, but still it wasn't equal to the age of consent for heterosexual act, which at that time was 16. So it also sparked a huge debate about whether we should have equal age of consent for homosexual sex and heterosexual sex. And another recurring thing would be Christianity and homosexuality. I think this debate started around 80s and continued until 90s, late 90s. I think every few years there's going to be a student publish an article discussing if it's compatible to be Christian and homosexual at the same time. And also they will get this kind of article will get a lot of response from both sides, basically. And the next one, please. And finally, I think what is very significant about the history of LGBTQ plus society is how the university and also how Durham Student Union try to build a community to support students in need. So I think the earliest support offered by Student Union can be traced back to 1977, where DSU Welfare Handbook officially acknowledged the social discrimination faced by LGBTQ students, and it offered information about a professional mental health doctor, I think, to offer guidance to homosexual students who face social discrimination. And another support would be Gay Line and Lesbian Line, which were founded in the 80s. And it was part of the Nightline service for students, but these two lines was exclusively for gay student and lesbian student. And it was run by students, and it was mostly to offer confidential advice for students in need. And this service was promoted regularly on student newspapers, so it was very accessible. It was very public to students. And also in the handbook, we can find information for LGBTQ friendly pubs in Durham and Newcastle. And there was a time that the LGBT Society organized regular visits to these pubs to kind of build connection with local community also, and also to not just in the university, but also the community in Durham and Newcastle. And finally, one major improvement or major step that made by Durham Student Union was to establish LGBT officer in the student union, because before 1994, so this LGBTQ relevant issues were all handled by a officer called welfare officer. And it was visible, but it was put together with a lot of other issues. And in 1994, there was a specific LGBT officer in the student union. So this post was responsible for advocating for LGBTQ rights and ensuring their concerns are heard and addressed at all levels of student body. So I think this final step at the Durham Student Union ensure the visibility of LGBTQ plus community and their needs at the university. So that is all I would like to share today. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.
So hello, I'm Ailey O'Hagan and I'm the Digital Preservation Librarian at Queen's University in Belfast. Today I'm going to talk through a tool that I developed to introduce more inclusive preservation approaches to for researchers in the library. Before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the National Archives and Research Libraries UK, whose generous support allowed me to conduct this project. And to set the context, on the left is a picture of Queen's Maclay Library, where I'm based, and on the right is our Special Collections reading room. As Digital Preservation Librarian, I sit within Special Collections, but I also support preservation of our electronic theses in open research, and there can be some overlap between the two as we support, guide and collaborate on academic projects. There are some challenges and changes that we've noticed. For one, new apps and platforms are transforming the way researchers create, access and share their digital files. This removes barriers to creation and engagement, which is great, but it can tie projects to proprietary software, which is not so great for preservation. Academics working on arts, archival or digital humanities projects are also increasingly seeking support from special collections. And we've noticed there can be some differences in understanding of terminology like archives, preservation, or access. And ultimately, although it is becoming easier for researchers to share and engage with materials, improved access to these digital materials do not necessarily equal improved preservation. So in broad strokes, our research output process looks a little bit like this. Researchers engage with the school submission procedure. They upload their content to Pure, although we're migrating to Figshare, and they liaise then with the open research librarians and research data librarian before their material is approved and published. But it's not until quite some time later then that we preserve. And the problem with this is that by the time we seek to preserve, the creators have moved on and are therefore not included in any decision-making about how we handle their work. For some, there is an assumption that preservation is at the end of a chain and that once we receive these materials, our only objective is to preserve. But the Society of American Archivists reminds us that no archival function is neutral, and we are working in line with staff capacity and resource, budget and storage parameters, which influence our decision making. Not all research has the same intentions for access and reuse, and by applying blanket migrations, we might be discarding elements that researchers find significant, and then upload constraints on our platforms can unintentionally bias against creators working with larger audiovisual or 3D models, predominantly those in arts and natural and built environment fields. So thinking about inclusivity and digital preservation, Daniel Steinmeier from the National Library of the Netherlands suggests 3 aspects of the Open Archival Information System, which is the OAIS model, that we use in digital preservation, that we can consider for more inclusive digital preservation practices. Making research available to the designated communities who will use it, taking steps to ensure we are capturing sufficient metadata to evidence provenance, and thinking about significant properties to ensure we retain the essence of the digital content considered most important by our creators. Jean Kramer-Smith asks, how can someone displaced by time or space be sure that they're experiencing the content with all of its significant properties intact? And so when thinking about significant properties, we need to think about how we can ensure an equal experience of the digital file across users and computer systems, and how can we support readers to interpret the data as it was intended by the creator. But first we need to know what the intention of the creator was. So the project then and the tool that I decided to create brought in that notion of significant properties and brought creators into the preservation process at an earlier stage. This is a visualization of the process that I took. I wanted to create a tool that would bring researchers in earlier. So it was informed by two approaches. In one hand, I conducted a survey with researchers to understand what support they might need. And at the same time, I also conducted focus groups with preservation practitioners to see where are the overlaps then from an archiving perspective. I aggregated this then to develop and iterate the tool. So the survey asked, what are depositors' working practices for saving, storing, and sharing data files? We asked a range of questions, whether creators compress, encrypt, or embed their content, how do they store it, what file sizes are they working with, do they use proprietary software, and perhaps more interestingly, what is the motivation behind this? And the results were quite revealing. So over half of our students identified that they use proprietary software, and this across a range of programs and platforms. 72% of our researchers rely on hard disk storage, including 82% who typically work with files above 10 gigabytes. And 57% do update regularly. So there is an awareness, at least, of keeping files updated and up to date. We can expect researchers to be uploading combinations of files rather than one working document. And this, some of the results showed the diversity of content across different fields and areas. So typically arts, English and languages and School of Natural Built Environment use the most diverse range of content and rely on visual, audio-visual, are more likely to produce audio-visual materials. We also find that 24% of researchers asked left the proprietary format questions blank, indicating that there is some more advocacy and awareness that needs to be raised in this area. 37% of our researchers habitually embed content in their digital files. Arts, English and languages, again, accounts for most of this. But other areas, particularly medical fields, are more likely to encrypt content in line with industry practice. So the next thing I did then was the focus groups, which was really to ask, are we meeting the needs of our depositors when we accept and preserve collections? So I presented the focus groups with the main motivations identified by the researchers for why they use particular proprietary software. For some, it's about meeting publisher requirements. For others, it's because it's cross-compatible or easy to share. Others value the access controls that they have over their research. And some of the findings from the focus group then were around the issue of how do we incentivize preservation and how do we make our language around preservation more accessible in communications with researchers. One of the findings that was particularly interesting was that people said when depositors perceive their work as an archival collection, they're more knowledgeable about quality and formats and more motivated to negotiate and provide for the legacy of their work. So this is an idea that I wanted to take forward with the tool to see how can we tap into the other, how other researchers perceive their materials to provide more support for preservation and to motivate and incentivize preservation. So some of the key takeaways from the focus groups were that distinction between research data and archives, and emphasising then the difference between access and preservation for researchers. The need to use simple language and shared definitions and present the minimum information possible as a gateway to open digital preservation practices to our creators. In general, emphasise metadata and provide additional support for web archiving. So I developed different categories that researchers could use to classify the types of materials that they're producing, and plotted the results from the survey and focus groups against those to begin to build the tool. And the categories that I came up with then were experience, story, are researchers producing a model? Is it a recipe, practical tool, or a collection? So for instance, if it's a practical tool, they might want to focus on preserving the functionality of that tool. If it's a story, perhaps it's preserving the structure. And I use this to help narrow down and simplify the preservation tasks. So the first iteration of the tool looked a bit like this. I used a program called Twine, which creates interactive stories. And researchers could then begin to follow a pathway that they felt related to their research. Once they began a pathway, they would be greeted with a purpose statement. So if, for instance, they felt that they wanted to preserve the experience of their research, this statement sort of emphasizes their main preservation goal to enable future users to recreate or understand that experience. Proceeding on, then they're given a preservation priority and some potential scenarios. One of the outcomes from the focus groups was that not all creators or researchers engage in the same way, and some prefer different types of learning. So we felt that these scenarios would help make that more accessible and more relatable for researchers. And after proceeding through the scenarios, then they're presented with some tips to get started. And these again are broken down into the three perhaps most important, but perhaps most salient tips to get started with. And each one, on clicking those, they'll be presented with some points then that they could consider. So feedback from this was generally very positive. Some of the researchers said that it allowed them to dream about my research. They liked the simplicity of the content and the step-by-step layout. Something that I found quite encouraging was that every single one of the researchers who tried the tool, after finishing the pathway that they selected, then went back and followed a new pathway because they were curious or didn't want to miss out. And because it was short enough and accessible enough that they felt engaged and excited to do that. So another surprising outcome was with the scenario-based examples. Participants assumed that there was always one right and one wrong answer. So it was surprising for them to see that it's not always black and white, but about the choices that they make, and digital preservation as something that could empower them. Some of the slightly alternative feedback, someone said that they had to feel their way into it and weren't sure which was the correct choice for them. This, I felt, was a positive because it shows that that the tool succeeded in getting researchers to think about their research in a way that they weren't used to. And also it did then have the added effect of encouraging them to learn more and to look more at other paths. And something then that I took on board for the second iteration was that if I don't recognize or understand the name of something like web crawl, then I assume it's not relevant to my work when actually maybe it is. So in these instances, I went back and I added in a glossary so researchers could tap on a word they're not familiar with and it would take them to a definition. So the tool then, in this way, we can introduce it to our researchers at the creation stage. They can use it to help improve their digital literacy. It becomes a supportive checklist then whenever they're getting ready to upload content to the repository. They can use it to assist with consultation with the open research librarians, the research data librarian, or to get in touch with the digital preservation librarian. And it also highlights areas where, for researchers working with larger files, for instance, or archival collections, that perhaps they want to consider a preservation deposit in addition to uploading to the repository. So I have a link here that I can share afterwards, but I wanted to quickly show the tool. So this is the final tool as it is currently. And I'm quite excited to show it today because this is the first time that I'll have shown it to a large group. So I'm really keen to see what you think. And also it is interactive. So if anyone wants me to pick a particular path, then I can do that too. But the researchers, when they open the tool, they're greeted with a simple statement and an invitation to start here. And then they're asked, what will your research generate? I thought today perhaps I would go with the collection path because that might be of most interest to people working with special collections and libraries. So this then outlines your preservation priority and a description of what a collection is in the context of this tool. So an important output from your research is the curation of a collection. It could be historical or contemporary, might be digitized or born digital, like oral histories, digital documents, or recorded performances. Your preservation goal is to ensure a legacy for these materials so they can continue to be accessed and inspire future research. And if this sounds like you can proceed through. It then introduces the preservation priority. So while you may have smaller compressed or web optimized copies of your collection for consultation via an online platform, for preservation it's important to retain uncompressed archival quality files. And then presents with these scenarios. So in this scenario, you wish to donate a collection of digital magazines gathered during your research, and you've agreed to transfer via USB. And researchers are presented with two options, one where they drag across files from their documents folder, or another where they use a robust copying tool. So if they select one, this outlines the scenario and why that may not be the most optimal way to do a file transfer. So in this case, the files become corrupted during the transfer process, and the donation is incomplete. In the other scenario, they use a robust copying tool, and this introduces some techniques that they could try. So in this case, validating checksums and confirming files are intact. And moving on to the next scenario. So each pathway has two scenarios. So in this one, I used a scenario that we frequently see where researchers have put their materials on a project website. And this is intended to then show the difference between a project website and a digital archive. So in this case, the person has created a preservation plan for their website, and in another scenario, they've assumed that it will be accessible online forever. And there's a bit of information then about data loss and accessibility decline. And then finally, proceeding to the tips to get started. So looking at this one, I've gone with provenance, digital archives, and then differentiating preservation from access. And in each of these, I've included a button so researchers can download the checklist. That way, if they do decide to go down multiple pathways, they can build a little portfolio of things to consider they can gather from different pathways that they feel are most relevant to them. And that's first look at the tool as it is finished. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And thank you very much. I'll put the link in the chat actually as well for anyone who wants to try it out or might think it's useful for others.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ailey. And I think we should take this opportunity now to thank all of our speakers. 3 really fascinating case studies, all on quite different topics as well, which has made for a hugely varied afternoon. Lots, very thought-provoking, lots of questions. So I think we should have virtual bouquets from everyone for our speakers for doing such a fantastic job. We do have 15 minutes now for some questions. There is no question that's too silly or, if you just want to expand on something a little bit, don't feel as though you have to ask something that is the world's best question. That's not what this is about. Please just ask anything of our panelists. They'd be really happy to use it as the starting point for some discussion. So don't be shy. But whilst we're waiting for people to put some questions in the chat, there are a couple of things that I would like to pick up on. The first theme that really struck me, listening to all 3 presentations, was the sort of relationship between the expertise of the sort of archivist, special collections expert, the data librarian expert, and the expertise that those role holders have, and the expertise of the artist, or the researcher, and how those come together in kind of, sort of the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts somehow in all of the narratives that you have articulated. So I wondered if the panel just had any thoughts on that, just in terms of their own experience with the case studies that you've shared, and whether you could expand on that aspect a little bit more. We said we would throw it open, so I don't know whether somebody wants to start.
I guess I could say something to that, Wendy.
Thanks, Rebecca.
I think that term expertise is really important, because I think for us it's about acknowledging that that expertise is symmetrical and balanced, and that we acknowledge the expertise of our artist collaborators, and that they trust us to be able to work with their sensitivities and their lived experience, and to acknowledge and to honour that. And that we work with them as co-producers, as people that have both a personal investment, but also they are researchers, they're legitimate researchers, whether they have an academic practice or a creative practice that involves none of the things we might associate with traditional academic scholarship.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, I just want to echo everything that you said, Rebecca, and just having that start. My role does actually involve a lot of discussions with academics and getting to use our collections within projects. And I think it's really about recognizing that we bring skills to the table, they bring their skills to the table, and it's kind of synchronicity that helps to as you mentioned, Wendy, kind of develop something that's bigger than the sum of its parts, and I think that is ultimately what makes a great project, is having so many different interdisciplinary and also different collaborators from academic and library/archivist profession, I suppose.
I think being able to meet on that common ground as well. whenever we're working with researchers, they are the experts on their materials, but they don't always know how much they know whenever they hand it over to us, and being able to then approach them and speak to them with language that they relate to and that makes sense to them. For instance, with the researcher who didn't think that she needed to think about web archiving because that's a scary archiving thing, but she did use websites and build websites in her project. So being able to come across and introduce these topics and make them more accessible is important.
Thanks. Is there any other kind of comments on that topic? I think maybe I reflect that sort of, Ailey, I think in your presentation it was very clear that I think it's the quality of the questions that's perhaps being asked by the data librarian expert in your example, which is making the researchers think a bit differently about their own research. So, you know, you potentially get improved research, you know, as a result of that combination. And it might be the same, Rebecca, in your example, maybe, you know, the artistic kind of endeavour is somehow enhanced by that kind of collaboration. And Jonathan, you were saying in your example that, you know, there is that, you know, that is that demonstration of the whole becoming greater than the sum of the parts. I wonder whether a follow-up question would be maybe around sort of whether that informs methodological development at all. And then we do have a couple of questions in the chat, which we must get to. But maybe a quick word on whether you think that there's any impact on methodology.
Yeah, I think for us, we've instituted a few workflows around artist residencies in particular. One of our collections assistants is now specifically assigned as part of their regular work to support fellowships and residencies, so that both our traditional academic residencies and our creative residencies have a single point of contact who can support them to access not just our own collections, but a range of cultural collections around the city and even nationally or internationally.
Does anyone want to add anything? Thanks, Rebecca. No? If not, we should move on because we do have some questions now in the chat. So the first one is for you, Rebecca, directly for you. It would be great to hear more about the trauma-informed training that you mentioned.
Thank you. That's a great question. I wish I were better placed to answer it. I don't know if my colleague Holly Smith is still in the seminar. She would be much better placed. And as I mentioned in the paper, our work on trauma-informed practice was very much derived from a previous project, a cataloguing project with the Women's Aid Federation of England archive. And it's really filtered through the whole team in really meaningful ways, to the extent that I would say the Compassionate Conversations training that we all had earlier this year, we recognise that it's not just applicable to this project, that it has really universal applicability, whether the material is conventionally triggering or not. So our care practices for each other and for our audiences, I think, have been tremendously enhanced by that whole programme of work.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rebecca. The next question is for Jonathan and Gia. In fact, the next two are, but there's a rounded praise for everyone's presentations as part of this question. As a result of documenting and uncovering LGBT plus histories through existing records held in Durham's collections, how do you see this impacting either future cataloguing or recataloguing or collections acquisitions policies?
I mean, yes. I mean, part of my role as university archivist has really been very much influenced by wanting to correct the historical record in terms of what we have in our collections, and also what we can make more visible. And hence one of the reasons why I have tried to reach out to particularly student societies to ask them to deposit their records with us. I think there might be almost a certainly in Durham anyway. I don't know if it happens anywhere else, but there's almost like an uneasiness from student societies about what are the university going to do with my records if I give them these records. So I think it's part of it's about changing the kind of perception and trying to garner trust with these societies to get them to realise that actually it's beneficial to particularly if it's an LGBTQ plus society, it'd be beneficial to the history of the LGBTQ plus communities. So it's part of my role certainly as university archivist is really around trying to make people aware of the importance of archives and why it's important to actually transfer the archives to us. And so I think it definitely is for me anyway. It was definitely a really important part of my role. It's something that I felt needed there needed to be more work done to it for not just LGBT but also from other marginalised groups as well, kind of creating almost like a more inclusive archive, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I feel like it would be very important to kind of raise this awareness of the importance of archive and also probably build some trust for the university library or something. Because I mean, and because when I was doing the research, I mean, I was very surprised that I could literally find so many information and they were just like lying there, like in the newspaper or just in the minutes books that I mean, there was so many valuable information about our university and how many significant events have been hosted in the university, but nobody actually talked about it in our official history. And this was very surprising. And yeah, I think maybe if we can raise this awareness, then more people would come to research, and then maybe more people would even offer some insight or where to find more material surrounding this. Yeah.
And there's a follow-up question, which is maybe a little bit more specific, but it's very related, which is, have you worked to flag the material you found on LGBTQ plus narratives in the archives so that future researchers can access these records easily? So that's a question about discoverability, really, and conscious intervention and choices.
Yeah, do you want to say a bit more about your blog?
Yeah, we have a blog on the website, Student Union website, I think, and it's a more extensive introduction of the research outcome of the headline findings. And also, I believe we have a form with more detailed records of what we exactly found. And if you want further research, I think you can access that form because, I mean, the headline finding we have posted either in the presentation we just have or in the blog. It's just a really small piece of the entire history we have found. And there are also a lot of different dimensions you could approach this history because these three main dimensions is just what I found most interesting, but there are also other dimension or other aspect that you can actually to understand this history. So yeah.
Yeah, and as Gia was saying, we have a catalogue that Gia developed. It's like a spreadsheet of all her findings, which I was able to use quite recently. We had a researcher who'd seen Gia's blog and emailed us and asked us, could they find more information? How do I access these records? So it's definitely that's already happening, which is great.
Brilliant. I think we have 3 minutes left, so there's final time for one quick-fire question, I think, and really it seems like a natural follow-up. We've got one coming in, so I'll retire my question. Did any of the presenters apply for funding, and from where? So it's a question about funding these kind of developments.
So I got funding to recruit Gia as a researcher from our internal EDI fund, which is a fund that's been set by the EDI department of the university to promote various CDI initiatives, and I was able to apply to that fund. So it was an internal fund, but it was within university, so it wasn't externally funded. But that was, to say, a massive help to me, and has been in the past as well.
My colleague Laura Claveria successfully applied to the Henry Moore Foundation for a fairly modest grant for things like the production costs for their installation, but I would say the majority came from our core funds.
Mine was a little bit different. I was granted the TNA RLUK Professional Fellowship. So I was given a fund to travel for a residency with the National Archives and learn and be mentored by two mentors from there, Melinda Haunton and Francesca Mackenzie. And also an agreement then with my institution to allow 10% of my time to work on the project. So a slightly different type of fund, but definitely something that I'd recommend people to go for if they're thinking of it.